which is adding and subtracting fractions. The objective for today's lesson is to be able to add and subtract fractions with any denominator. Okay, prior knowledge for this lesson then, you should be able to find the lowest common multiple of 2 or more numbers. So for example, the lowest common multiple of 4 and 6 is 12. And if you're not sure how to find that, we do the 4 times table and the 6 times table, and we find the lowest number that appears in both. You should also be able to find equivalent fractions. So for example, 2/3 is equivalent to 4/6, which is equivalent to 8/12. They are all worth the same amount. If you're struggling with any of those things, please make sure you do the previous lesson before this one. Things you need today then, you need your maths book or some paper to write on and a pen or a pencil to write with. So when we're adding and subtracting fractions then, if we want to add fractions with the same denominator, then it's pretty easy. I've got a block here that is in 8, so our denominators, remember, telling us how much out of the whole. So our whole block is made up of 8 equal sized pieces. 3 out of 8 means I've got 3 of the 8, and we're going to add 4 out of 8, so it's out of the same 8, so I've got 4 more. So in total we can see I now have 7 out of 8 pieces. So when the denominators are the same, we keep the denominator because that's telling us what it's out of in total, and we add the numerators to see how much we've got. The same with subtracting. So both of our values here, our fractions, are in 12ths, so our block is cut into 12 equal pieces. And we've started off, we have 7/12. So there we are, I've got 7 out of 12, but someone's going to take away 4 of them. So we're going to take away 4 of the ones that I had, and I am left with just 3 out of that 12. So again, when the denominators are the same and we're subtracting, we subtract the numerators. So we're only going to be doing adding and subtracting when we have the same denominators. Now unfortunately, most of the time our questions come with different denominators, so we need to find a method to be able to work out those. So we want to do 2/3 plus 1/4. Now they have different denominators. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our knowledge of equivalent fractions to be able to compare those fractions so that we can then add them together. So we look at our denominators. Our first step is to say, well, our denominators are 3 and 4. We need to find the lowest common multiple of 3 and 4. So that's our 2/3 and our 1/4. The lowest common multiple of 3 and 4, remember, if you can't spot it straight away, do your 3 times table and your 4 times table, and we're looking for the smallest number the same in both times tables. So in this case it is 12. So 12 is our lowest common denominator. So we then create our equivalent fractions. Remember, to create an equivalent fraction, we know we'd like the denominator to be 12, so we work out to get from 3 to 12 we times by 4, and we do the same to the numerator. So whenever we're creating an equivalent fraction, whatever we do to the denominator, we must do exactly the same to the numerator, otherwise it won't be equivalent anymore. So 2 times 4 is 8. Now we have to do the opposite one. So we want our denominator here that was 4 to also be 12. So we're going to split that one up into 12. To get from 4 to 12, we've multiplied by 3. We do the same to the numerator. 1 times 3 is 3. Now we have two fractions that have the same denominator, so we can now add them. So we simply add the numerators. 8 plus 3 is 11, and we have 11 out of 12. So to be able to add with different denominators then, the key steps are to firstly find the lowest common multiple of our denominator. That gives us our lowest common denominator. And then to create our equivalent fractions by multiplying. So we check what do we multiply the denominator by to get the new denominator, and do the same to the numerator. We do that independently for each fraction, and then we can just add or subtract the numerators depending on the symbol we're given. Make sure you're happy with that before you move on. We're going to do a few more examples. Okay, so this is the way we normally see them written, and we don't normally have the diagrams, but you are of course free to draw the diagrams if you wanted to. So we look at the first one then. So our first step then is we look at our denominators. They're different. We need them to be the same. So we're looking at 5 and 10. We want the lowest common multiple of 5 and 10. Now you might spot it very quickly. If you don't, simply make a list. Our 5 times table and our 10 times table, the smallest number that's in both is 10. So I've just stopped. So I started doing my 5s, then I started my 10s, realised the first number was the same as a number I already had. So that must be my common denominator. Okay, now we have here a denominator of 5. We want it to be 10. To get from 5 to 10, we're going to need to multiply by 2. So we're going to have to multiply the 4 by 2 as well. So we're going to multiply this whole thing, top and bottom, by 2, and that gives me 8 tenths. This next one, well, it's already in tenths, so I don't actually need to do anything to it. I just need to keep it. Essentially, I'm multiplying it by 1. So we get 8 tenths plus 1 tenth, add the numerators, and we get 9 tenths. Our second one then, our denominators are 4 and 12, so we need the lowest common multiple of 4 and 12. So again, 4 times table and 12 times table, 12 is in both, so 12 is going to be our denominator. We need to change the first one then, so to get from 4 to 12, now again, if you're not sure what to multiply by, we can count. Look, to get from 4 to 12, I need to do 1, 2, 3. I need to multiply it by 3. So 1 times 3 is 3, 4 times 3 is 12. We get 3 over 12. Our second one again is already in 12, so we can see that, like it's number 1 here. So we can keep the 7 twelfths and we add them together. Now this time we've got 10 out of 12. Now you might notice they're both even numbers and they can be simplified. So if you can simplify your fractions at the end, you should. Remember to simplify. We're still making them an equivalent fraction, but we're doing the opposite. Instead of making them bigger, we're making them smaller. So we need to decide what we can divide 10 and 2 by. They're both even, so I can divide them by 2, and that would give me 5 over 6, so 5 out of 6. So if you can simplify them, please try to simplify them. Okay, our next one then, we've got 5 and 4. So again, I've got to do the lowest common multiple. If I'm not sure, I'm going to do my times tables. My 5 times table and my 4 times table. The smallest number in both is 20. So I've got to get from 5 to 20, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm multiplying this one by 4. 3 times 4 is 12. 5 times 4 is 20. So we get 12 over 20. This time it's subtract, so let's make sure we do subtract. And now I've got to change my 4 to 20. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're going to multiply this one by 5, top and bottom. 1 times 5 is 5, 4 times 5 is 20. So we've got our equivalent fractions again. They now have the same denominator, so we can, sorry about that, we can subtract, not add. Okay, so subtracting 12 minus 5 gives us 7 out of 20. Okay, sometimes we're given them where we've been given a fraction and we've got to find the missing one. So these are a bit more challenging. So I'll talk through an example of these and then you can have a chance to have a go at some of these if you want to. So with these ones, the best thing to do is to look at what denominator the answer is in. So the answer is in twelfths. So let's first of all create an equivalent fraction for this where the denominator is 12. So to get from 4 to 12, I need to multiply by 3. So I need to multiply the numerator by 3 as well. So that gives me 3 twelfths. So 3 twelfths plus something is 11 twelfths. Well, what do I have to add to 3 to get 11? Well, I would need to add 8. So 3 twelfths plus 8 twelfths must make 11 twelfths. That could be your answer, but if we want to finish that off to make it a bit nicer, we can try simplifying this. So again, 8 and 12, the biggest number that fits into both is 4. So if I divide them by 4, I get 2/3. So a quarter plus 2/3 is equal to 11 twelfths. So these ones are a little bit more of a challenge if you feel you want to tackle that. Make sure you've got copies of all of the different examples before you move on. Okay, so we've got some questions here then. The first 5 are adding or subtracting, so be careful which one you're doing. So follow the steps through. Remember, find the lowest common multiple, make equivalent fractions, then add or subtract. And if you can simplify your answer, please try and simplify your answer. Once you've done those, if you feel you'd like to have a go at the challenge questions here, these are the ones where there is a fraction missing, so it's not 2 minus signs, there's a fraction missing from these spaces. See if you can fill in those fractions. So pause the video, have a go now. Alright, let's have a look then at the solutions for these. So for number 1 then, we should have 7/8. For number 2, now you might have 3 out of 30, or if you've simplified that, you would have 1 out of 10. For number 3, you might have 8 out of 12, or again, if you've simplified that, you might have 2 out of 3. For number 4, you should have 5 out of 6, and for number 5, 1 out of 4, or quarter. If you did try the challenge ones down there, for the first one you might have 5/15, or if you simplified that it would be 1/3. For 7 you might have 4/20, if you simplified that it would be 1/5. For 8, 5/30, which would be 1/6. For 9, 8/24, which would be 1/3. And for 10, 3/6, which would be 1/2. Make sure you've marked your work and made any corrections that you need to. Well done if you did manage all of those challenge questions. They are quite tricky. Okay, so we're going to continue then with our adding and subtracting fractions, but we're going to move on to looking at more than 2 fractions. Now the same process applies. We still have to find that lowest common denominator, but we have to find it for all of the fractions that we have. So looking at this first one, we've got 6, 12 and 12. Now the lowest common multiple of 6 and 12 is 12, because 6 will fit in to 12. So we know that the denominators need to be 12ths. To get from 6 to 12, we need to multiply by 2, so we do the same to the numerator. For these ones, they are already in 12ths. So we have 2 12ths, we keep the 3 12ths and the 5 12ths, and now we're going to add all of them. So it's 2 plus 3 is 5, plus 5 is 10. We get 10 out of 12, and again, they're both even, so I know that I can simplify them. So the biggest number that fits into 10 and 12 is 2, so I'm going to divide them both by 2, and that gives me 5 out of 6. This one at the bottom then, so again let's look at our denominators first. We've got 8 and 3 and 2, so we're looking for the smallest number that 8 and 3 and 2 fits into. Again, if you're not sure, list the times tables for each number until you find a number that appears in all 3 lists this time. So I know that 24, 8 fits into 24, and 3 and 2. So again, find your equivalent fractions. So to get from 8 to 24, I've got to times by 3. So I'm going to times the whole of this one by 3. From 3 to 24, I'm going to times by 8, so times everything by 8. And from 2 to 24, we've got to times by 12, so we're going to multiply everything by 12. So there we are, there's our 24s, and we've multiplied our numerators as well. So do this one bit at a time. Now, the difference this time then, we're going 21 minus 16, so that gives us 5, plus 12 gives us 17. So we have 17 out of 24, and I can't simplify that. One of the ways I know I can't simplify that is because 17 is a prime number, and it doesn't fit exactly into 24, so therefore it can't be simplified any further. So look out for those prime numbers, they can help you to see if you can simplify your answers or not. Okay, make sure you've got those written down then as good examples before you move on. Alright, your turn then. Have a go with those. Be careful whether you're adding, subtracting or a mixture. But remember, we're finding the lowest common multiple of all of the numbers and then creating our individual equivalent fractions for each number before we do any adding or subtracting. Pause the video, have a go now. Okay, let's have a look at the solutions then. So for the first one, we should have 2 out of 12 plus 4 out of 12 plus 3 out of 12, which gives us 9 out of 12, and we can simplify that to 3 out of 4 or 3/4. For B, our lowest common denominator for those is going to be 8, so we have 6 out of 8 minus 1 out of 8 minus 2 out of 8. So from 6 take away 1 is 5, take away 2 is 3, 3 out of 8, and we can't simplify that one. 3 again is a prime number. And for C then, so 4 and 8 and 5, the lowest common denominator is 40, so we get 30 out of 40 plus 5 out of 40 minus 16 out of 40. So remember, we've got to do 30 plus 5, which is 35, take away the 16, which gives us 19 out of 40. And again, we can't simplify that, another one of our prime numbers there. Okay, make sure you've checked your work and done any corrections as you go. Okay, finally for today's lesson then, this is a challenge question. So read through it carefully, have a go yourself. So if you want to try this for yourself, then you need to pause the video, read through each part of the question carefully. You're using the answer from the previous part of the question to move into the next part of the question. Okay, so have a go yourselves. If you're not confident having a go yourselves, then I'm going to talk it through. Okay, so the number 5 bus leaves the station. It is a quarter full. So we don't actually know how many people are on the bus at the moment. We just know a quarter of the bus is full. And at the first stop, 1/8 of a busload of people get on. So how full is the bus now? Remember, we had a quarter to start with, and we've now got 1/8 extra. So that means we've got to have a quarter plus 1/8. Now, again, if we want to do a quarter plus 1/8, we need a common denominator. So we're going to have to change a quarter into eighths, and that gives us 2/8. So we would have 2/8, which is equivalent to our quarter, plus our 1/8, which gives us 3/8. So now the bus has 3/8 full. At the second stop, 1/16 of a busload get off and half get on. What fraction of the bus is now full? Okay, so at the minute we've got 3/8, we need 1/16 to get off. So to be able to take away a 16th, we need the answer from here to be in 16ths. So to change 8 to 16, we times by 2, so that'll be 6/16. So we're going to have 6/16 minus 1/16. But a half need to get on. Now again, remember we're working in 16ths. So a half is 8/16. So we're going to take away 1/16, but we're going to add on 8/16. So there we are. So that's our 3/8 is 6/16 minus 1/16, but plus a half, which is 8/16, which gives us 13/16. So that's now how many people are on the bus. Now it says nobody gets off at the next stop and the bus is full when it leaves. What fraction got on? Well, if we want to make this a whole, remember that's when the numerator and denominator are the same value. To get from 13/16 up to 16/16, we would do 16/16 minus 13/16, which means 3/16 must have got on. So remember, whenever something is full, a whole is where the same numerator and denominator. Part 4 then. The bus remains full until 8 people get off. It's then 7/8 full. How many people does the bus hold? Well, if 8 people got off and it's now only 7/8 full, that means 1/8 of the people must have got off, because we must have had 8 out of 8 to be full, and we've now got 7 out of 8, so 1 out of 8 must have got off, and that is the equivalent of 8 people. So if 1/8 is 8 people, and a full bus, remember a full bus is when these numbers are the same, so 8 out of 8, so 8 times 8 must be 64 people. So the whole bus holds 64 people. Finally then, at the next stop, 5/16 of a bus load get off. How many people is this? So we already know that 1/8 is 8 people. So let's work out 1/16. Okay, so if 1/8 is 8 people, 1/16, a 16th is half of an 8, that's splitting it into 2, is 4 people. So 5/16 must be 5 lots of 4 people, which is 20 people. So 20 people got off. Okay, well done if you managed to do any of that on your own. Hopefully if you didn't, as we worked it through, you will have understood what we're doing with that adding and subtracting fractions. But the key to today's lesson is to make sure that we have those common denominators, and we do that by finding the lowest common multiple and creating our equivalent fractions for each different fraction before we do any adding or subtracting.